Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom, all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to go through this this word being called profitable, right? And I guess the title I wrote down is being profitable and examples of our forefathers, right? So I wrote down a couple examples of different forefathers, in their situations where they were profitable to those who were around them, right? And I guess, without going through all of them, I guess in this one lesson, I might go through them individually. But I wanted to go through and, bring some, light in regards to what does it mean to be profitable. I thought it was a very interesting word. And, sincerely, hopefully that this lesson may be edifying, right? So what does the word mean? Like, what do you mean by profitable? So I went to the etymology, right? And I guess I'll read profitable and I'll go down and jump down to profit and see what sticks out, right? So this is profitable in the etymology, and it says yielding spiritual and moral benefit, useful. It says advantageous, expedient, helpful, money-making, profit, mid-13th century, income derived from an office, property, transaction, benefit, spiritual benefit. It says profit, gain, from the Latin profectus, growth, advance, increase, success, right? So it's business. It's very business oriented. It's very it's you're in the business of making money, right? I think in Ephesians 4 it just talks about the vocation, right? And essentially when you go into that parable of the with the guys with the servants with the talents, they were taking the money that they had and essentially flipping it, right? They were trying to increase, right? They were trying to grow, advance it, right? And it's the same mentality when you see these different forefathers I want to bring out, here, right? It says accomplish, make progress, be useful, do good, essentially. It says pro, meaning it's for, and it says facere, meaning to make or do. So to put forth something and make it, make it happen, basically, right? Usefulness, right? And you're going to see that in this example I'm about to bring out here, right? So I want to go through one example of one of our forefathers and an instance when they essentially were profitable, right? So for the sake of time, I'm not going to read the whole chapter. I'm just going to kind of jump around and hit some key points and then kind of interject here and there, right? But a lot of these things where our forefathers were in different, as a matter of fact, I guess I'll start off with this precept here. Hold on. Oh boy, 1 second. Okay, so this is Romans chapter 15, verse 4, and it says, whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope, right? So when we go through these different accounts with our respective, forefathers, we can get and pull apart and extract understanding in regards to things, do's and don'ts, mistakes, things that they did where they, it was essentially pleasing to the Lord, right? So, we can take these things and apply them, to our walk, as well. We can take these things and it makes us more sharper, because when you look at the templates of our people today, when they essentially are doing the same thing, but they are just following a template that brings forth wickedness. And when I say a template, I'm referring to a lot of our people that are in Hollywood, musicians, actors, sports players. They follow their template, whether it might be getting tattoos, whether it might be adultery, all these different things that they do, that essentially it doesn't bring forth righteousness. They're just examples of what not to do and how not to live, right? So let me go back here to just bear with me on this. Okay, so this is Genesis chapter 41. I'll start at verse 12, and I'm going to jump around, right? So I'll read a couple verses here and there, but Lord's will, this will be edifying. And it says, and there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him that he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and he him hanged. And it says, then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. He shaved himself and changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none like that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not me. The Most High Yahweh Bashim Shai shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, in my dream, behold, I stood at the bank of the river, right? So basically, it goes into a detailed, dream that the Pharaoh had. And basically, there's a dialogue going on between the Pharaoh and Joseph, right? He had, the Pharaoh had a dream, and there was no else to interpret it. But, Joseph, he was nigh unto Yahweh Bashim Shai, right? So, he had that skill, he had that understanding to be able to, know of dream, to be able to understand and break down, dreams, what people had, right? So it kind of goes into the details of the dream that Pharaoh had. So I want to jump down, right? So just bear with me on this. Okay, so I'll read from verse 34, right? So this is basically, so Joseph interprets the dream, and now he's kind of giving him an action plan on what to do, right? You're going to have years that are going to be pretty much, what's the word I'm looking for? You're going to have a lot of abundance, right? You're going to have some years filled with abundance of crops, right? And then you're going to have some years where it's going to be basically like a famine, right? So this is verse 34 in Genesis 41, and it says, and let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the fifth part of the land of Egypt in 7 in the 7 plenteous years. And it says, and let him gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let him keep the food in the cities, right? So this is basically going into an action plan. Okay, this is what you do, this is what's going to happen, and this is what he's kind of putting forth like a it's basically like an action plan, so to speak, right? Okay, we know this information is coming. We know this is gonna come to pass. What can we do that's practical? We're not just gonna sit on our hands and do nothing, right? So this is verse 36, and it says, and that food, shall be for store in the land against the 7 years of famine, and which shall be in the land of Egypt, and that the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And it says, verse 38, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as the Most High hath showed thee all this, that there is none so discreet and wise as thou art, thou shalt be over my house. It says, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. Right? So going back into the main topic here, now you see, Joseph the Lord was with Joseph, where he had the skill, the intelligence, the understanding to be able to interpret and understand dreams and actually give an analysis of what is actually being conveyed here, right? And even going further to even put forth like an action, plan, like you have bullet points, like you have like a to-do list, basically. Okay, this is what we're going to do now. We're going to check this off, we're going to check this off, we're going to check this off. Okay, so Joseph, in this situation, going back to the what's it called? The word in the etymology being profitable. Joseph in this situation was very, very useful, and that's one of the words one of the definitions when you go into the word profitable. This person in this particular scenario is useful. He is very knowledgeable, right? He is very advantageous. He's very helpful, because there was no other person in his vicinity that was able to actually break down and understand and give that interpretation of the Pharaoh's dream, right? He didn't have anybody, that was useful other than Joseph, right? So one of the other things, it says, the definitions here, going back to the definition, it says to be useful, to do good. It says to increase spiritual benefit and advantage. So it shows that Joseph had a usefulness. He had spiritual benefit. He was a man of value. He wasn't just a Joe Schmo. He wasn't just a Kodak Black. He wasn't just a Kendrick Lamar. He wasn't just a Jay-Z. It shows that, wisdom and truly is the principal thing. As a matter of fact, let me get that, because sometimes, not even sometimes, but a lot of our people don't seem to understand the value in having wisdom, right? Being so close to Yahweh Bashim Shai, right? And that's how, fearing the Lord and, is one of the first steps to, to get wisdom, right? But our people do whatever, and this is why they get hanged up in so much different situations, because they don't have any wisdom. So this is Proverbs chapter 4, verse 5. Excuse me. And it says, get wisdom, get understand it, forget it not, neither decline from the words of my mouth. Forsake her not, and she shall preserve thee. Love her, and she shall keep thee. Here's the point. Wisdom is the principal thing therefore get wisdom, and with all that getting, get understanding, right? So wisdom really is the chief thing, and that is what makes us more adorned. That's what makes us shine. I want to get that later on. What makes us more, what's the word I'm looking for? More embellished, because we're supposed to be, as Israelite men, we're supposed to exemplify Yahweh Bashim Shai upon the earth, right? What does it say in Deuteronomy? Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom in the sight of the other nations. I did a recent lesson in regards to the way our people behaved, because our people behave like degenerate plants, because they go after filthy, abominable practices that they're not supposed to. So it shows that those people, those Israelites that go after these different wicked practices don't have any wisdom, right? So let me go through. Let me just read a little bit more here. Because, Joseph was essentially, not only was he useful, but he was spiritually decked out on the inside. And our people like to prioritize looking decked out on the outside, but it shows in their actions, in their behaviors, in their discourse, in their conversation. Their conversation, when you go into the etymology of the word conversation, it means, essentially, I want to say it's in a boat. Hold on, let me just double check. Just slipped my mind. So it says a place where one dwells, general course of actions or habits. It says behavior. Their conversations are filthy, right? It says a way of life, a monastic life. It says a place. So essentially we dwell within these scriptures, right? Yahweh, it says, it says in, I believe it's in Hebrews, lo, I come in the volume of the book, right? So we learn about Yahweh, we learn about our forefathers. That's our dwelling place, right? Okay, so let's go back here. Okay, so this is Genesis chapter 41, verse 41, and it says, And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen. That's that's high vibrational stuff right here, man. Anyways, it says and put a gold chain about his neck. And it says, and made him to ride in second chariot which he had. They cried before him, bow the knee, and made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, without thee shall without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephnath-Paneah, and gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On. And Joseph went out over the land of Egypt, right? So that's pretty much, eventually, he gets reunited, with his brothers. It ended up being a very, very, despite, he went through tribulation. But the point from this takeaway is that in this scenario, he was still very, very profitable, amongst heathen, right? And if I may give just a short testimony, this is not to brag or boast. I've had moments where I've had heathens, ask me certain questions about certain things in regards to whether it's wisdom or guidance or something like that, because wisdom, our people don't seem to understand the power of being nigh to Yahweh Bashim El Shai, right? So let me just get this, because I mentioned it earlier. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 1, and it says, Who is as the wise man, and who knoweth the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom maketh his face to shine, and the boldness of his face shall be changed, right? So it shows, in a man's walk, a man's character, that he actually exemplifies wisdom. People feel that, in the world they call it, aura. You have interesting aura, because of the way, you speak, the way you conduct yourself, because the scriptures talk about a man shall be known by his walk. This is the way we're supposed to exemplify us, as Israelite men upon the earth, right? And I'm just using an example here, Joseph being in the midst, of heathens. He exemplified, he was profitable, to those, to the people that were around him, right? Yes, we're in captivity, but we still, can be profitable to those around me. And I may get, I've had other scenarios where people might come to you. That's another thing also. You probably have experienced scenarios, amongst your own selves, where people actually come to you and gravitate to you because they know something is peculiar, something's different about you, but they can't really pinpoint, what it is, right? It's this you dwelling with Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, and the Lord open up our minds to be able to understand these things, and it changes the way you conduct yourself, right? You're not conducting yourself as a degenerate, as one of the bywords that have been listed and we are described as, right? We conduct ourselves as people who are upright, because that's what we were created to be, So I guess I'll end off with this one here. This is Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, and it says, "Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven," right? So, we glorify Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai because, this is, we didn't give ourselves, this understanding, right? We don't boast in ourselves, right? If we boast, like King David, before he took out Goliath, he boasted in Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai, right? That's righteous boasting. We don't really boast in ourselves because we know that without the Lord we're nothing, right? So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to do an example in regards to being profitable, being useful, and essentially adding more to your I guess you can say your spiritual bank account in regards to like understanding, getting into things, because the scriptures do say we have an unction to know all things, right? So, and an unction, when you go into it, it's an anointing, right? So that's pretty much it. But Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai B'Shem Makakudash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth. Until next time, I say Shalom.